So if you just want to give me your name for levels.
Sue Llewellyn.
Brilliant, Sue, thank you. Right. So I'm going to talk to you about social media. Social media. So, social media for a radio breakfast programme. How is that different? How is tweeting and Facebooking live on air different to, say, tweeting and Facebooking in the office after the programme or before the programme?
Tweeting live on air brings a sort of immediacy to it. You get instant feedback. But also there are issues that you need to be aware of when you're doing it, because obviously if it's live, like live broadcasting, you can easily make mistakes. So you need to be prepared to know exactly what you're going to be saying, if you can, and to be sort of quick off the mark. So I'd say first up, you need to be properly trained. You need to know how to use these tools and get the language right.
What sort of things should people take into consideration when they're using social media on a live programme?
The sort of things you need to be aware of when you're using social media for live programmes are the audience, obviously, the sort of feedback that you're getting from people. You need to be aware that you can promote your programme ahead of time and involve the audience. It's not just when you're on air, it's the whole news gathering kind of process. So getting people to contribute ideas, telling them what's coming up. I think a bit of warning to say, tomorrow on the programme we're going to be talking about this, send us your thoughts. Certainly if you're tweeting in the evening for a breakfast show, the audience are there, they're listening. And that's a very, very busy time on there. So if you've got something good coming up, trail ahead, ask people to join in, give them plenty of warning. There's no point saying, right, we're on air now, because people won't see that tweet straight away. They need to see it several minutes beforehand, and they go, oh, okay, I can make time for that. So giving them time, things is also really helpful.
So when they're on air tweeting, Facebooking, using social media, what works best? What should they be doing?
First up, they should be listening to the interviews that they're doing on the programme and extracting really juicy quotes. And then that could be linking back to the programme to say live on air now. They must make sure that they have the hashtags for the topic the person's talking about, the username of the people, the guests that they've got. Those are really important sort of bits of homework that you should do. So make sure you've got the hashtags, the usernames, and make sure they're spelt correctly. And then extract some interesting quotes and lead back to the programme if you're live on air. Or equally, do the listen again afterwards.
Does the interaction on social media differ when it's not live? When you're tweeting in the office, putting the programme together, or after the programme's gone out, does that make a difference?
I think it's good for telling people what's happening at the time to be tweeting live on air like that. So I'll say that again. I think when you're tweeting live on air, it's really good to tell people what's actually coming up, what's happening. I think in terms of the audience response, you probably need a fairly thick skin, because they might be saying, oh, that was a load of rubbish. I don't like that. And it could just be an instant response. So perhaps be a little prepared that some of the responses you might get from people are certainly not broadcastable. If you've got anything good, you should definitely be retweeting it or joining in the conversations on Facebook saying, thanks very much for your comment, really appreciate it. Don't just leave them hanging.
What sort of things do you get from social media interaction that you can't get from traditional broadcasting, from just being on air, from being on the radio, from being on TV?
Using social media as a journalist brings an enormous range of important things. So I'll start on again. Using social media as a journalist can bring you an enormous range of advantages. You can hear what people are interested in, you can pick up on stories and get some ideas for that. You can ask people what they'd like to ask that guest, so you can ask for questions. You can ask them if they've had experience of things, so you're going to get case studies, you'll get instantaneous feedback to the stuff you're putting out there. You'll build this sort of warm, friendly relationship with your audience, and the more you respond to them, the more they'll respond to you. And it's always really interesting if you retweet them or one of the presenters retweets them or quotes them, they go, that's amazing, I love it. So you're going to get that sort of lovely, warm, fluffy feeling towards your breakfast show.
What works best on there? What works really well for a programme in social media world?
I think the sort of things that work really well for a programme would be sourcing stories, getting case studies. That works really well. So you can ask people for their personal experience of whatever the topic is you're doing. I think for sort of building relationships with people where they perhaps give you a tip-off to a story, that works well. And it's essential for building trust. They really trust you if they feel as though they've been part of the whole process of putting together the programme. And also never forget to say thank you. And people often forget to say thank you, or they'll just leave comments hanging and people, they might ask a question and then they don't respond to it. Well, that's crazy. Talk to people as though they're in the room with you, and they'll certainly feel part of your show then.
And what are your top tips for social media?
Top tips are obviously, as a trainer I would say this, make sure that you understand what you're dealing with. Make sure you know why people share, why they're joining in. So get yourself trained properly and become familiar with the tools. I'd say definitely if you're running a show, do your homework. So make sure you've checked out the relevant hashtags for whatever the story is, and also the username of the person perhaps that you've got on, the guest that you've got coming on the show. Tweet regularly and post regularly, and it's not just in the morning if you're building up to your program, although obviously you could say coming up 10 to 8. Give people some hint of what's coming up and when it's coming up, because then they can plan ahead to listen in. And don't forget to tell them afterwards, you know, in case you missed that. You could put those things out later on. In case you missed it, here's a link to listen again. And if you've got anything fun, share it, because that's what people like.
And what are the rewards of good work on social media sites? What's the benefit for a program?
The benefit for a program of using social media is that you build a relationship with your audience. You can also reach new audiences that perhaps you would otherwise not have found. So maybe it's, I don't know, older women, or you're looking for teenagers or something. You can get, you know, reaching audiences in different ways, but also the content that you get. You'll get tip-off for stories, you'll get case studies for things, you'll get interesting quotes, you'll get story ideas. And all of those things were, essentially, they're going to make your job easier. It used to be a nightmare in the newsroom finding case studies for things, but it honestly takes seconds to get them these days if you know how to use the tools properly.
And how do you think social media should be built into the working pattern of people? Should it be, you know, someone dedicated to that, or should it just be part of everyone's daily routine?
I've always said that absolutely everybody should get on board with social media. There are some perhaps who shouldn't be tweeting or shouldn't be Facebooking. They haven't got the natural enough style. But in terms of using it for sort of news gathering and building stories, I think it's going to make your job easier. So I do think it shouldn't be Bob's job in the corner. It should be everyone's job. And we should change the way we do our meetings and things so that there isn't always a what are they talking about on social media, and have that immediacy of what's going on, and be flexible enough to include it live if something breaks while you're on air, or you get some really interesting comments from people while you're on air.
And do you have any examples of where it's worked really well that you can think of offhand?
I've got so many examples. I would say I've got so many examples of where social media has worked really well, and it could be just from years ago when I was doing a social strategy for BBC Breakfast TV. We did a thing about sheds, and basically people are being made redundant, so they're working at home, and therefore B&Q and Homebase were saying we've seen a rise in sales of sheds. So people working at home, and I said, brilliant, we'll get the presenters to share their shed. So that's seeding your content, telling people what you're doing the next day. So I said, use this hashtag, #MyShed, and share your shed with us. So I got Bill and Sian to share their shed. We asked the viewers to share their sheds too, and I found two people on Twitter who talk about sheds a lot. They are shed influencers. I said, could you ask your followers to share their shed? It was the biggest audience response Breakfast had ever had to anything. So it's as easy as that. We had shed loads of sheds. So you will find this. If you get something that's popular and it's fun, and actually fun works really well, then that's going to make a huge difference. But the case studies are legion for how it's going to benefit your programme.
And despite all that, do you think some people still find social media subsidiary to the main programme, but something that maybe isn't worth the effort?
There's undoubtedly the dinosaurs in a newsroom or on a programme who still think social media is people talking about what they had for lunch. That's complete rubbish. If you follow people, interesting people, you're going to get interesting stuff. If you ask people questions, they're going to give you interesting stuff. And I think it's important that it's not an add-on, it's an add-in. It should be something that we do as part of our job. And everybody should sort of understand that it can be useful to them, genuinely useful.
And is social media something people can ignore?
I would suggest that social media is something you cannot ignore for so many reasons. One, because it's going to make your job easier. Two, because it's going to make better programmes. It'll make you tell better stories as a journalist. It'll reach audiences in different places you didn't think you could reach. It's a bit like the beer, isn't it? Finding things in places you didn't know you could find them. So I think you can't afford to ignore it, because also problems happen there, and you need to be listening to these things to make sure they don't happen to you.
Brilliant.
Do you think that's enough?